For 3 months, the billionaire's newborn had cried almost every day. 13 nannies had come and gone. None of them lasted. But on the morning Claire Bennett walked into the mansion, something happened that nobody could explain. The baby stopped crying, and the billionaire's first question wasn't about the baby. It was about Claire. The sound of a baby crying echoed through the enormous Reynolds mansion. It was nearly noon, but the house felt as though it had been awake all night. On the second floor, a nanny stood beside a white crib, looking completely exhausted. She had tried everything. She had changed the baby's diaper. She had prepared a bottle. She had rocked him. She had walked around the nursery singing. She had even called the pediatrician. Nothing worked. The baby kept crying. His tiny face was red, and his little fists were tightly closed. The nanny picked him up again. "Come on, Noah. Please." She gently bounced him in her arms. The baby screamed even louder. The nanny closed her eyes. She looked like she was about to cry herself. A housekeeper standing near the door watched helplessly. "Maybe try the rocking chair." "I already did." "His bottle." "He refused it." "Maybe he's tired." "I know he's tired." The nanny immediately lowered her voice. "I'm sorry." She looked down at the baby. "I just don't know what else to do." The housekeeper sighed. Neither of them needed to say what they were both thinking. Another nanny was about to leave. The nanny walked over to the small table beside the crib and picked up her phone. "I'm done." The housekeeper looked at her. "You're quitting?" The nanny nodded. "I can't do this anymore." "But you've only been here 5 days." 5 days too many." She grabbed her handbag. "I've worked with difficult babies before, but this is different." The baby continued crying behind her. She looked back. "I'm sorry." Then she walked out. The housekeeper followed her into the hallway. At the bottom of the staircase, another maid was waiting. She looked at the nanny's suitcase. "You're leaving?" "Yes." The maid sighed. "That makes 13. The nanny stared at her. 13. The maid nodded. 13 nannies since the baby was born. The nanny looked upstairs. "Good luck to the next one." She walked out of the mansion. The door closed. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then the baby's cries echoed down the hallway again. The housekeeper looked toward the ceiling. Whoever takes the next job has no idea what she's getting into. Across the city, Claire Bennett was sitting at a small kitchen table. A cup of coffee sat untouched in front of her. Her phone was in her hand. She had been scrolling through job advertisements for nearly an hour. Most of them paid too little. Some required qualifications she didn't have. Others were already filled. Then she saw one. Live-in nanny wanted. The salary immediately caught her attention. Claire read the description. Private family. Newborn baby. Full-time position. Excellent salary. Private accommodation included. She stared at the screen for a moment. Then she pressed apply. A few hours later, her phone rang. "Hello. Is this Claire Bennett?" "Yes. This is regarding your application for the nanny position." Claire sat up. "Yes. We'd like to interview you tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow? 9 o'clock." Claire smiled. "Yes. I'll be there." The woman gave her an address. Claire wrote it down. When the call ended, she looked at the address again. She didn't recognize the name of the family, but she knew the address was in one of the most expensive neighborhoods in the city. She immediately began preparing for the interview. The following morning, Claire stood outside the gates of the Reynolds estate. She looked up at the enormous mansion. It was much bigger than she had imagined. A security guard checked her identification before allowing her through. Claire walked up the long driveway, carrying a small suitcase. The front door opened. A woman in her late 50s stood there. "Claire Bennett." "Yes, I'm Mrs. Wilson. Come in." Claire stepped inside. The mansion was beautiful. Polished marble floors. A massive staircase. Crystal chandeliers. Expensive paintings. Everything looked perfect. But something didn't feel perfect. There was tension in the house. Claire could sense it immediately. A young maid walked past carrying folded laundry. She looked at Claire. Then at the suitcase. Then back at Claire. "You're the new nanny?" Claire nodded. "Yes." The maid gave her a sympathetic look. "Good luck." Claire smiled awkwardly. "Thank you." Mrs. Wilson gave the maid a warning glance. "Don't start." The maid shrugged. I'm only telling her the truth. Claire looked confused. The truth about what? Mrs. Wilson hesitated. Then she sighed. The baby has been difficult. How difficult? The young maid laughed quietly. 13 nannies difficult. Claire's eyes widened. Mrs. Wilson frowned at her. Ignore her. I'm serious, the maid said. She looked at Claire. Every nanny before you quit. Claire glanced toward the staircase. Why? Before anyone could answer, a baby's loud cry came from upstairs. Everyone stopped. The young maid pointed upward. That's why. Claire looked toward the staircase. Another cry. Then another. She took a breath. Can I see him? Mrs. Wilson looked surprised. You haven't even had your interview. Claire smiled. Maybe the baby should interview me. The maid laughed. For the first time that morning, someone smiled. Mrs. Wilson nodded. Come with me. They walked upstairs. The closer they got to the nursery, the louder the crying became. Claire could hear someone inside trying to calm the baby. She reached the door. Mrs. Wilson opened it. Claire stepped inside. The nursery was beautiful. White walls, soft cream curtains, a white and gold crib, shelves filled with expensive toys. But the peaceful room was filled with the sound of the newborn crying. Claire looked at him. Something about the moment made her pause. She didn't know why. She simply stood there. The baby continued crying. Mrs. Wilson said, His name is Noah. Claire nodded. He's beautiful. He's also very stubborn. Claire smiled. She walked closer. Can I hold him? Mrs. Wilson hesitated. Of course. Claire carefully picked up the baby. She adjusted him against her shoulder. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Claire began gently rocking him. She didn't sing. She didn't shake him. She simply held him. The crying became softer. Everyone stared. The baby stopped. Completely. Claire looked down. Noah's eyes were open. He was staring directly at her. Mrs. Wilson's mouth fell open. The maid whispered, No way. Claire looked confused. What? Mrs. Wilson slowly walked closer. He's quiet. Claire smiled. Yes. No. Mrs. Wilson shook her head. I mean, he's actually quiet. The maid came closer. I've never seen that before. Claire looked at the sleeping baby. Maybe he was just tired. Mrs. Wilson stared at her. 13 women have tried to make him tired. Claire laughed softly. She had no idea why everyone looked so shocked. The baby rested peacefully against her shoulder. For the first time in weeks, the nursery was completely silent. That afternoon, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. Ethan Reynolds had returned home. He was 38 years old, successful, wealthy, and accustomed to controlling almost every part of his life. But there was one thing he couldn't control. His son. As Ethan entered the house, he expected to hear crying. Instead, silence. He stopped in the foyer. He looked at the housekeeper. Where's Noah? Upstairs, sir. Is he okay? He's fine. Ethan frowned. Why is it so quiet? Mrs. Wilson smiled. Because he's sleeping. Ethan stared at her. Sleeping? Yes. Since when? Since the new nanny arrived. Ethan looked toward the stairs. The new nanny? Yes, sir. He immediately started walking upstairs. Ethan opened the nursery door. He expected to see chaos. Instead, he saw his son sleeping peacefully. He stopped. For several seconds, he simply stared. His expression softened. He walked closer to the crib. He's asleep. Mrs. Wilson smiled. Yes. Ethan looked at his son. I don't understand. Then he noticed Claire standing near the window. She turned around. Their eyes met. Ethan paused. Something changed in his expression. It lasted only a second, but it was there. Claire noticed it. Ethan looked at her carefully. Then he looked back at the baby. You must be the new nanny. Yes, sir. He nodded. What did you do? Claire smiled. Nothing special. Nothing. I just held him. Ethan looked at Noah. His son was still asleep. He had never seen him this peaceful. What's your name? Claire Bennett. Ethan repeated it quietly. Claire Bennett. He stared at her. There was something about her. Something he couldn't place. He looked at her face again. Then at the way she stood. Then at the baby. His brows tightened slightly. Claire noticed. Is everything all right? Ethan looked away. Yes. A brief silence followed. Then he said, I apologize. It's just. He stopped. Claire waited. It's nothing. He turned toward the crib. How long have you been working with newborns? A few years. Where? Claire hesitated for only a moment. Different places. Ethan glanced at her. Restaurants. Claire's expression changed slightly. Excuse me. He seemed confused by his own question. I don't know why I asked that. Claire smiled politely. I've worked different jobs. Ethan nodded. Right. He looked at his son again. Then he walked out. Claire watched him leave. Downstairs, Ethan walked into his study. He placed his briefcase on the desk, but instead of opening it, he stood still. Claire Bennett. The name kept repeating in his head. He had seen her before. He was almost certain of it. But where? He sat down. He closed his eyes. Nothing. Just a strange feeling. A familiar voice. A familiar face. A memory that seemed to be hiding just beyond his reach. He opened his eyes. Why do I know that woman? That evening, Claire sat quietly in her new room. She had been hired. The job was hers. The salary was more than enough to solve many of her problems. But she couldn't relax. She kept thinking about Ethan. She hadn't expected to see him again. Not here. Not after all these years. She looked at the ceiling. Then she whispered to herself. Why now? She quickly stopped herself. She didn't want to think about the past. Not tonight. She had a job to do. And tomorrow would be another day. The following morning, Ethan walked into the kitchen. Claire was preparing Noah's bottle. He watched her for a few seconds. Then he spoke. Good morning. Claire turned. Good morning, Mr. Reynolds. How did he sleep? Very well. Ethan nodded. That's unusual. Claire smiled. Maybe he's getting used to me. Ethan leaned against the counter. Perhaps. He studied her. Claire. Yes. Where exactly did you say you worked before this? Claire paused. She slowly placed the bottle on the counter. I worked at a restaurant. Ethan's expression changed. What restaurant? Claire looked at him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she gave him the name. Ethan went completely still. A faint memory suddenly moved through his mind. A restaurant. Late at night. A woman standing beside him. A voice telling him he shouldn't be driving. Then darkness. Ethan blinked. The memory disappeared. Claire picked up the bottle. Is there something wrong, sir? Ethan stared at her. No, but his voice was different now. He looked at Claire one more time. Then he walked away. As soon as he disappeared down the hallway, Claire slowly exhaled. She knew something had changed. Ethan was remembering. And if he remembered everything, the secret she had kept buried for years might not stay buried much longer. Ethan walked away from the kitchen without saying another word, but his mind was no longer in the mansion. It was somewhere else. Years ago. A restaurant. Late at night. A young woman standing beside him. A soft voice telling him he was too drunk to drive. Then nothing. Ethan stopped halfway down the hallway. He turned around. Claire was still in the kitchen. She was quietly preparing Noah's bottle as if nothing had happened. Ethan watched her from a distance. There was something about her. He couldn't explain it, but now he was certain. He had seen her before. The question was, when? That afternoon, Ethan called his longtime assistant, Marcus. Marcus had worked for him for almost 10 years and knew when something was bothering him. They were sitting in Ethan's private office. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Marcus. Yes, sir. Do you remember a restaurant called the Grand Oak? Marcus thought for a moment. Of course. When did I stop going there? Marcus smiled. After that incident. Ethan frowned. What incident? Marcus looked surprised. You don't remember? Remember what? Marcus hesitated. Sir, you were drunk that night. Ethan's expression changed. What happened? You stayed after everyone left. And you wouldn't let anyone drive you home. Ethan stared at him. Who took me home? Marcus shook his head. I wasn't there. I only heard about it afterward. Who told you? One of the staff members. Ethan leaned forward. Was there a woman? Marcus thought. I believe so. What woman? I don't know. Ethan stood. Find out. Marcus looked at him. Sir, I want the restaurant records from that night. How long ago was this? Years. Marcus nodded slowly. I'll see what I can find. Ethan sat back down. Do it quietly. Meanwhile, Claire was upstairs with Noah. The baby was lying on a soft play mat. Claire smiled as he reached for a small toy. You're getting stronger every day. Noah laughed. Claire smiled. Then she suddenly stopped. She looked toward the door. Someone was standing there. Ethan. He had been watching them. Claire immediately stood. Sir. Ethan smiled faintly. Sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. You didn't. He looked at Noah. He really likes you. Claire looked down at the baby. I like him too. Ethan smiled. I've noticed. There was something strange about the way he said it. Claire became uncomfortable. Ethan walked closer. Can I ask you something? Yes. Have you ever worked for a family before? Yes. Any wealthy families? Claire nodded. A few. Did any of them have children? Yes. Ethan nodded. Do you remember their names? Claire looked at him. Why are you asking me all these questions? Ethan smiled. I own a company. I'm used to asking questions. Claire didn't smile. Of course. He walked away. But before leaving, he looked back at her. Claire watched him disappear. She knew what he was doing. He was looking for something, and she was afraid of what he might find. That evening, Ethan received a call from Marcus. I found something. Ethan immediately sat up. What? The restaurant still has some old employment records. Did you find the woman? There were several female employees that night. Any names? Marcus paused. One name stands out. Ethan waited. Claire. Ethan's heart skipped. Claire what? Claire Bennett. Silence. Ethan slowly lowered the phone. Are you sure? Yes. Ethan closed his eyes. The same name. The same woman. The same feeling. He whispered, That's impossible. That night, Ethan barely slept. He kept seeing fragments. A restaurant. A young waitress. A glass falling onto the floor. His own voice laughing. Someone telling him, You're too drunk. Let me help you. Then a car. A driveway. A front door. A woman's hand. And then, nothing. Every time Ethan tried to remember her face, it disappeared. He sat up in bed. What happened that night? The next morning, Ethan did something he hadn't done in years. He drove to the Grand Oak. He parked outside and sat in his car for several minutes. The restaurant looked different, but the entrance triggered something. He remembered walking through those doors. He remembered drinking. He remembered laughing with friends. Then he remembered everyone leaving. He was alone. Someone had stayed behind. A waitress. Ethan closed his eyes. A voice came back. Sir, you need to sit down. He opened his eyes. Claire. Her face appeared for half a second, then disappeared again. Ethan stepped out of the car. He walked inside. An older manager recognized him. Mr. Reynolds? Do you remember a waitress named Claire Bennett? The manager stared at him, then slowly nodded. Yes. Where is she? The manager sighed. She stopped working here a long time ago. Do you know where she went? No. Ethan's jaw tightened. Did she leave suddenly? The manager thought. Yes. Why? I don't know. Ethan looked around the restaurant. Then something caught his attention. A photograph on the wall. It showed employees from several years earlier. Ethan walked toward it. He scanned the faces. And there she was. Claire. Younger. Standing in the back row. Ethan stared at the photograph. His breathing became heavier. He finally remembered her face. Not everything, but enough. Claire. Back at the mansion, Claire was feeding Noah. She noticed Ethan's car returning. Her hands trembled slightly. She knew exactly where he had gone. She didn't need to ask. He had gone back to the restaurant, the place where everything had started. Claire looked down at Noah. Then she whispered, He's remembering. That evening, Ethan confronted Claire in the hallway. Claire. She turned. Yes, sir. Where were you working before you came here? I told you. The Grand Oak. Claire became silent. Ethan stepped closer. You worked there. Claire didn't answer. I saw your photograph. Claire's face remained calm, but her eyes changed. Ethan noticed. You know me. Claire looked away. I knew you were a customer. That's not what I mean. He stepped closer. I've been trying to remember what happened that night. Claire's heart raced. What night? Ethan stared at her. The night I met you. Claire said nothing. Ethan watched her carefully. You were the waitress who helped me. Claire finally looked at him. Yes. Ethan's expression changed. So you do remember. Claire swallowed. I remember working at the restaurant. But you remember that night. She looked away. I remember some things. Ethan's voice became quieter. Why didn't you tell me? Claire looked back at him. Because you never asked. The answer stunned him. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then a baby's cry suddenly came from upstairs. Claire immediately turned toward the nursery. Ethan followed. Noah was crying. Claire rushed toward him. She picked him up. The crying stopped almost instantly. Ethan stood in the doorway. He watched. The same strange feeling returned. The baby trusted Claire. More than anyone. Ethan looked at his son. Then at Claire. Then back at the baby. Something wasn't right. He couldn't explain it. But his instincts were screaming at him. There was a connection between them. A connection he didn't understand. Later that night, Ethan sat alone in his study. He opened a folder Marcus had given him. Inside were old restaurant records, employment records, names, dates. Then Ethan found something else. A handwritten note attached to Claire's old employment file. He read it. His expression slowly changed. The note contained a date that was only a few months before Noah's birth. Ethan stared at it. He looked toward the nursery, then back at the paper. His heart began pounding. No, he picked up his phone. Marcus. Yes, sir. I need you to find something for me. What? I want every record connected to Claire Bennett from the year she left the restaurant. Marcus was silent. Everything. Everything. Ethan looked at the date again, especially anything involving a pregnancy, a hospital, or a child. He ended the call. For the first time, Ethan wasn't simply trying to remember Claire. He was trying to discover what she had been hiding. And somewhere upstairs, Claire stood alone outside Noah's nursery. She had heard enough to know that Ethan was getting dangerously close. She placed her hand on the nursery door. Her eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "Please don't find out yet." But Ethan had already begun searching. And this time, he wasn't going to stop. By the following morning, Ethan had barely slept. The folder containing Claire Bennett's past was still sitting on his desk. He had spent most of the night looking through it. Restaurant records, employment documents, old addresses, dates. But there was one thing he couldn't find. A clear explanation of what had happened to Claire after she left the restaurant. That bothered him, because the more he learned about her, the more questions he had. And the biggest question was still the same. Why did she seem to know him? At breakfast, Ethan watched Claire from across the room. She was feeding Noah. The baby was smiling. He rarely smiled for anyone else. Claire noticed Ethan staring. "Is everything okay, sir?" Ethan looked away. "Yes." He picked up his coffee. Then he asked casually, "How long have you known about Noah's routines?" Claire paused. "His routines. How he likes to be held. How he sleeps. How you know when he's hungry." Claire looked at the baby. "I've worked with children before." Ethan nodded. "Right." But he didn't believe her. There was something too natural about the way she cared for Noah. It wasn't simply experience. It was instinct. And Ethan had begun to notice it. A few days passed. Ethan continued investigating quietly. He discovered that Claire had left the restaurant shortly after the night he couldn't fully remember. He discovered she had moved to another city. Then he found a hospital record. The record was incomplete, but it contained a date, a birth date. Ethan looked at the date. His heart began beating faster. He looked at Noah's birth certificate. The dates were almost identical. He stared at both documents. "No." He immediately called Marcus. "Are you sure these records belong to Claire Bennett?" "Yes." "There's no mistake?" "No, sir." Ethan lowered his voice. "Find out where the baby from that record went." Marcus hesitated. "Sir, that may take some time." "Take the time." Ethan ended the call. He sat alone. For the first time, a possibility entered his mind. A possibility so shocking that he didn't want to believe it. That afternoon, Ethan watched Claire playing with Noah. The baby grabbed her finger. She laughed. Ethan stood at the doorway. Something about the scene felt strangely familiar. Then a memory came rushing back. A restaurant. Claire standing beside him, his head spinning. Her voice, "You're too drunk." His own voice answering, "I can walk." She laughed softly. "No, you can't." Then another memory. Claire helping him into a car, his hand holding hers. A driveway. A front door. Then the memory vanished. Ethan grabbed the doorframe. He closed his eyes. For the first time, he remembered enough to know that Claire hadn't simply been a waitress. She had been the woman who helped him that night. But there were still pieces missing, and he needed the truth. The next morning, Marcus returned. He placed a folder on Ethan's desk. "I found something." Ethan opened it. Inside were old adoption records. His hands became still. There was a child, a newborn boy. The records showed that the child had been placed for adoption shortly after birth. Ethan looked at the name of the birth mother. His heart stopped. Claire Bennett. He slowly sat down. The room became silent. He looked at the child's information, then at Noah's documents. Everything matched. Ethan stared at the papers for several seconds. Noah, his own son, the baby he had raised, the baby he thought belonged to another life, the baby who had mysteriously become attached to Claire. Ethan suddenly understood why she had looked so uncomfortable around him, why she seemed emotional whenever she held Noah, why Noah calmed down the moment she touched him. But he still needed proof. He couldn't confront Claire based only on records. He needed certainty. That night, Ethan waited until everyone was asleep. He entered Noah's nursery. The baby was sleeping peacefully. Ethan gently took a small sample and placed it into a sealed envelope. The next morning, he secretly obtained a sample from Claire. He sent both samples for testing. Then he waited. Those 2 days felt like 2 months. Claire noticed that Ethan had become distant. He spoke less. He watched her more. Whenever she entered a room, he seemed to study her. She knew something was wrong, but she continued pretending everything was normal, until Ethan received the call. He was sitting in his study when the phone rang. "Mr. Reynolds?" "Yes, we have the DNA results." Ethan closed his eyes. "Tell me." There was a pause. "The probability that Claire Bennett is the biological mother of the child is greater than 99.9%. Ethan stopped breathing. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then the man continued, "And there is another result." Ethan opened his eyes. "What?" "The child is also biologically related to you." Ethan slowly lowered the phone. He stared at the wall. The truth was finally undeniable. Claire was Noah's mother, and Ethan was his father. The woman he couldn't remember properly. The woman who had walked into his home looking for a job. The woman his son immediately trusted. It was all connected. Ethan found Claire in the garden. She was sitting on a bench while Noah slept nearby in his stroller. "Claire." She looked up. "Yes, sir. We need to talk." She immediately noticed the seriousness in his voice. "About what?" Ethan held up the DNA report. Claire's face changed. She didn't speak. Ethan walked closer. "You knew." Claire looked away. "You knew the moment you saw him." She remained silent. "Didn't you?" Claire swallowed. "No." Ethan's voice became firmer. "Don't lie to me." She looked at him. His eyes were filled with hurt. "I had a DNA test done." Claire's eyes filled with tears. Ethan continued. "The result says you're Noah's biological mother." Claire closed her eyes. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "I didn't want this to happen." Ethan stared at her. "You knew." Claire nodded slowly. "Yes." Ethan's face fell. "How long?" "From the moment I saw him." "Why didn't you tell me?" Claire wiped her tears. "Because I was afraid." "Afraid of me?" "Afraid of everything." Ethan looked at Noah. "Tell me the truth." Claire finally broke down. Years earlier, Claire had been working at the Grand Oak. It was late. Most of the customers had already left. Ethan was still there. He had been drinking heavily. Claire knew he was too intoxicated to drive. She tried to help him. She got him into a car. She took him home. But that night changed both their lives. Ethan remembered only fragments because he had been drunk. Claire remembered everything. The following morning, Ethan woke up confused. He remembered a woman, a waitress, but he couldn't remember her name. He returned to the restaurant looking for her. But Claire had already left. She had discovered that she was pregnant. She was terrified. She didn't know what to do. She had little money, no stable home, no idea how she would raise a child alone, and she didn't know how to find Ethan. Eventually, she gave birth to a baby boy. She loved him, but she believed she couldn't give him the life he deserved. So she made the most painful decision of her life. She gave him up for adoption. She thought that would be the end of it. She never imagined that years later, she would walk into a mansion and find her own son sleeping in a crib. She never imagined that the billionaire she had tried to forget was the man standing in front of her. And she never imagined that he had somehow become the child's adoptive father. Back in the garden, Claire wiped her tears. I didn't know where he would go. Ethan listened silently. I didn't know who would adopt him. She looked at Noah. I only wanted him to have a better life. Ethan's voice trembled. And you never tried to find him? Claire shook her head. I tried. She looked at him. But I was afraid that if I searched too much, I would only make things worse. Ethan looked away. For the first time, he understood how much pain she had carried alone. But he was still hurt. You should have told me. I know. I could have helped you. I know. I could have been there. Claire cried. I didn't know how to find you. Ethan closed his eyes. Then the memories returned. Not fragments anymore. He remembered Claire at the restaurant. He remembered her helping him. He remembered her voice. He remembered the night. He remembered the morning after. And finally, he remembered her face. He looked at Claire. It was you. Claire nodded. Yes, the woman from that night. Yes. Ethan sat down. For years, he had wondered who she was. He had tried to find her. He had forgotten her face. And now she was sitting in front of him. The answer had been living under his roof. There was silence between them. Then Ethan looked at Noah. He knows you. Claire smiled through her tears. Maybe he never forgot. Ethan looked at his son. The baby reached toward Claire. Claire took his little hand. Ethan watched them. For the first time, he didn't see a nanny holding his son. He saw a mother holding her child. And he realized that the baby who had rejected 13 nannies wasn't being difficult. Perhaps he had simply been waiting for someone familiar. Someone he had known before he could even speak. The next few weeks weren't easy. There were painful conversations. There were questions. There were moments when Claire blamed herself. There were moments when Ethan was angry that he had lost years he could never get back. But slowly, they forgave each other. Ethan understood that Claire had been young and frightened. Claire understood that Ethan had never known about the child. Neither of them could change the past, but they could decide what happened next. And they chose Noah. Together, Claire no longer worked in the mansion simply as a nanny. She became part of her son's life. Ethan made sure she never had to wonder where her child was again. And little Noah finally had both of his biological parents around him. The house that had once been filled with endless crying became peaceful. Laughter filled the halls. Noah grew into a happy little boy. And the mansion that had once seemed cold and lonely became a home. One evening, Ethan stood by the nursery door, watching Claire read a bedtime story to Noah. Noah was smiling. Ethan smiled too. Claire looked up. Their eyes met. Neither needed to say anything. Everything that had happened had brought them to that moment. A moment they never expected. A second chance. Not to erase the past, but to build something better from it. And sometimes, the greatest mysteries in life are not solved by searching farther. Sometimes, the answer has been standing right in front of you all along. Moral lesson: never assume you know someone's story from what you see on the outside. People make difficult choices for reasons we may never understand. And sometimes forgiveness can give people the second chance they thought they had lost forever. If you enjoyed this emotional story, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more suspenseful stories like this one.